The first time he saw her, it was raining in that soft, cinematic way, no thunder, no drama, just the kind of drizzle that makes people quiet and the world oddly intimate. Noah had ducked under the canvas awning outside the old bookstore on 5th Street, shaking the water from his curls like a dog. She was already standing there, arms crossed tightly, the collar of her charcoal coat flipped high against her cheeks. Not beautiful in the magazine way, but captivating. Every detail, every line of her face, carried a story you couldn't scroll past. There was a strand of silver threading through her dark hair like a streak of defiance, and her eyes had that unguarded, human sadness that either draws you in or sends you walking fast the other way. Noah didn't walk away. He didn't speak at first. Just glanced over, nodded politely, took out his phone and pretended to be absorbed. But in truth, he was watching her in the reflection of the store's window, how she leaned her weight onto her left foot, how her fingers picked at a hangnail, how she blinked rapidly when a group of laughing college girls passed by, brushing her shoulder without saying a word. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just took it. There was something in that, some strange dignity in her invisibility, that hit him in the gut. It could have ended there. They might have shared the awning and never spoken. But the bookstore owner, a squat, elderly man with a face like an old stone wall, opened the door to lock up and grunted, "You two either come in or keep moving, it's closing time." And that's when Noah, for no reason at all except the thrill of it, turned to her and said, "You want to split a coffee? I'm already late to nowhere." Her laugh startled even her. It was low, almost embarrassed, as if her own voice surprised her. "Do people still say things like that?" she asked, adjusting her collar and squinting at him with a faint smirk. "Late to nowhere?" "They do now," he replied. They walked to the cafe 2 blocks down, the one that stayed open until midnight and never had music playing. She told him her name was Elise, nothing else, and he offered his first name like it was a trade. She kept her answers short, but not cold. Curious. As if she were waiting to see if he'd say something idiotic, and half expected he would. She said she liked black coffee but didn't drink it past 6 p.m. He asked why. She said, "Because then I don't sleep, and then I remember too much." He didn't press. He just ordered a decaf for her and a drip for himself, and they sat in the corner by the window, watching people pass. "You're too young for rain," she said suddenly, stirring the untouched decaf. "You should be out drinking or falling in love or smashing guitars." Noah smiled. "What if I already did all that?" "And you survived?" "Barely." She looked at him, really looked, and then something in her face changed, like a wall lowered by a few inches. "How old are you?" she asked. Her tone was gentle but guarded, the kind of question that expected a lie. 22, he said. "How old are you?" She hesitated just long enough for it to matter. 42. He didn't flinch. "Okay." "Okay?" "Yeah. You have a good face for it." That made her laugh again, a short, surprised burst that turned into a coughing fit. She covered her mouth and looked away, embarrassed. "God, I haven't laughed like that in years." Noah leaned in just a little, not quite enough to break the rules of polite distance, but enough to make it feel like the room belonged only to them. "Maybe that's a sign." "Of what?" "That we both showed up at the right awning." Her smile, when it came this time, was soft and slow, like something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for a very long time. A real smile, not the social one people fake at dinner parties, not the polite tilt of lips you give your coworkers. This one reached her eyes and pushed years off her face, and for a second, Noah saw the girl she used to be. Not the woman the world had worn down, but the one who still wanted to believe in something. And just like that, he was in trouble. Not because of her age, not because of what people would say, he hadn't thought that far ahead yet, but because he saw her. Really saw her. And she, for the first time in what must have been years, let herself be seen. That was the hook. Not the rain. Not the chance meeting. The fact that someone who had stopped expecting anything from the world had looked across a table, tasted laughter again, and didn't immediately apologize for it. They started meeting every Wednesday and sometimes on Sundays, never in the same place twice, always in that vague zone between spontaneous and scheduled. He never asked for her number. She never asked what he studied. It was as if naming things would make them too real, would force the air out of the room too fast. But the gaps began to fill in anyway. He learned she was divorced, that she worked in fundraising for a non-profit she didn't believe in, that she used to play the piano but stopped after her mother died, that she lived alone in a condo with hardwood floors and blank walls, and that most of the furniture in her place came with it. She learned he studied literature but didn't read the books he was assigned, that he hated the sound of people fake laughing on podcasts, that his father walked out when he was 15 and sent a postcard 2 years later with no return address. There was nothing strategic about what they shared, it spilled out in little pieces, in long silences, in the way their coffee cooled untouched between them while they listened to each other breathe. When she told him she didn't have any close friends anymore, not since she turned 40 and everything got oddly silent, he didn't try to fix it or offer advice. He just nodded and said, "Yeah, people vanish. Sometimes on purpose." The first time he touched her hand was unplanned. She had made some offhand comment about not recognizing herself in mirrors anymore, something about feeling like a visitor in her own face, and without thinking, he placed his hand lightly over hers. She didn't move away. She didn't even blink. They sat like that for 10 minutes, two people pretending not to notice they had crossed some line. That line kept getting pushed. After their fourth meeting, she let him walk her to her car. On the fifth, they stood in the dark by the bike racks behind the arts building, and she leaned in close enough for him to smell her perfume, a scent he couldn't name, the kind that didn't belong to anyone under 35. She didn't kiss him. She said, "You don't get to romanticize me. I'm not a lesson or a mistake or your coming-of-age story." He looked at her with a straight face and said, "I'm not asking for any of that. I just want to see you when you're not on guard." She studied him, the way someone might look at a street sign after getting lost. Then she stepped back, nodded once, and said, "All right." By week 7, people started noticing. It wasn't anything dramatic, just the small, invisible network of glances and whispers that exist on a campus where everyone knows someone. Noah didn't say anything, but he began to hear his name in rooms he hadn't entered. A girl in his seminar asked if he was into older types with the kind of smirk that assumes permission. A friend from his dorm made a joke about professors being lonely and generous. One night, he walked into the common room and the laughter stopped, just for a second, just long enough to change the temperature of the air. He didn't flinch. He was used to people inventing stories. But when he told Elise, her expression changed. She didn't look surprised, just resigned. "It's starting," she said. He asked what she meant. She shrugged and said, "This is the part where they stop seeing us as people and start writing headlines in their heads." He wanted to fight it, but there was nothing to fight. No names had been said. No accusations had been made. Just the slow, passive shift of perception that turns curiosity into suspicion. It got worse after they were seen leaving the library together. She had come to drop off a book he'd mentioned wanting to read. She hadn't even entered the building, just waited by the side door. But someone saw. Someone always sees. The next morning, an envelope was slipped under his door, no return address, just his name printed in shaky block letters. Inside was a printed photo of the two of them standing too close and a single line typed underneath, "You don't get to stay invisible forever." He showed it to Elise the same night. She read it twice, folded the paper slowly, and placed it face down on the table. "That's not a threat," she said, "that's a warning." He asked if she was scared. She said no. But her voice had a crack in it she didn't bother to fix. He wanted to hold her right there in the open, to stop pretending the world didn't exist, but she stood up too fast and said, "You need to understand something. I've survived too long to let this be my undoing. You might not care what people think, but I have a job, a name, a past they'd love to repaint." He said he didn't care about any of that. She said, "You will." That night, he didn't sleep. He walked the city for hours, past quiet storefronts and shut-down cafes, past people smoking on stoops and girls in heels carrying their shoes. He wasn't afraid of exposure, but he was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about the two of them. There were rules in place, silent and brutal, that would crush her long before they touched him. She couldn't flirt in public without being judged. She couldn't be happy without someone accusing her of desperation. And if they were found out, it wouldn't be his name dragged through glass. It would be hers. The next time they met, she wore sunglasses, even indoors. When he joked about it, she didn't laugh. She simply said, "They already think I'm a story. I'm just trying to control the ending." And just like that, the space between them, once filled with possibility, was now thick with risk. He started showing up later. Not because he didn't want to see her, but because the anxiety had settled in his chest like a heavy coat he couldn't take off. Every time he left his building, he felt watched, and every time his phone buzzed, he wondered if someone had posted something or tagged him in a photo he didn't know existed. The air around him felt different now. Elise noticed the change before he said a word. She didn't ask what was wrong. She simply sat across from him in the booth and said, "It's already in motion, isn't it?" He nodded. She leaned back, took a deep breath, and looked out the window like she was watching a train she wasn't sure she wanted to board. Neither of them said it, but the weight of what they had done, crossing some unspoken line they didn't ask permission to cross, was finally catching up. What started as quiet interest had turned into something neither could dismiss. And now, that thing needed to exist in secret or not at all. The only time they could talk freely was at night, by phone, while both of them pretended the calls were about nothing. It always started with something light: music, news, food, but by the second hour, the honesty crept in. She would say things like, "I didn't realize how long it's been since I actually liked who I was around someone," and he'd answer with, "I didn't realize how much noise I'd been living in until you got quiet next to me." These weren't confessions. They weren't building toward anything specific. They were just stacking moments on top of each other, hoping the weight would make them solid. She once told him about her first marriage, how young she had been, how the promises made at 22 always felt final until you realized nothing was. He told her about the time his mom found out his father had been living under another name 3 states away with a new family. Elise didn't say, "That must have been hard." She said, "That's the kind of thing that doesn't stop happening even when it's over." He didn't thank her for that. He just let the line go silent, because for once, he didn't have to fill it. One night, he stayed out too long and missed the last bus. Elise offered to come pick him up without hesitation. He hesitated. Then he said yes. Her car pulled up to the curb at 11:42 p.m. He got in and didn't speak for the first mile. She didn't ask anything. When they reached the side street where nobody walked after dark, she stopped the car. He turned to say thank you, but the words didn't land. She looked at him, really looked, and said, "If we're going to keep doing this, you need to be clear about what this is to you." He told her he didn't know how to answer that without sounding ridiculous. She waited. He finally said, "It's the only part of my life that feels like it matters right now." That wasn't enough for her. "Do you understand what this will cost me if it goes public?" she asked. He said, "Yes." She shook her head and said, "No, you don't." Not really. They didn't kiss that night. They didn't even touch. But something shifted anyway. The next week, they met in a hotel room across the city, one she had used before for work trips. She paid in cash. He came up the back stairwell. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even planned. But when he walked in and saw her there, sitting on the edge of the bed with her shoes still on, he said, "You don't have to explain." She stood up and said, "I know." It wasn't their first time being physical, but it was the first time it didn't feel like an escape. It felt like two people saying, "This is real, and we're still doing it anyway." The following afternoon, a mutual acquaintance of Noah's and someone from Elise's alumni board saw them exiting the elevator together. He didn't say anything to them, just kept walking. But when Noah checked his email later that night, there was a message from his faculty advisor requesting an urgent meeting. Elise called him an hour after that, her voice lower than usual. "We've been seen," she said. "He works with my boss's wife." Noah asked what they were supposed to do now. She said, "We stay calm. That's all we can do." The calm didn't last. Over the next few days, small changes began happening fast. Elise was asked to reassign a project she had been leading for months. Noah's advisor asked whether he'd considered writing a thesis on ethics in faculty-student dynamics, though neither of them had ever discussed such a topic. A girl in one of Noah's classes began tagging him in vague social media posts about predatory power plays and campus silence. None of them named him, but they didn't have to. The tone had changed. The shadows had grown longer. Noah and Elise started limiting contact during the day. She suggested they pause for a while. He didn't answer. That night, he called her at 2:17 a.m. She picked up on the second ring. He said, "I feel like I'm walking through a fire that hasn't started yet." She didn't try to calm him down. She said, "That's exactly what it is." They stayed on the phone until dawn, saying very little, just listening to each other breathe. The next day, Elise didn't show up to their usual meeting spot. He waited an hour. Nothing. He texted. No reply. At 10:43 p.m., she sent a message, "I'm being watched closely. Give me some time." He stared at the screen for a long time before locking his phone. The silence now wasn't the peaceful kind they had shared before. This one felt heavy. Like a door slowly closing from the other side. He saw her again 12 days later, not by invitation, not in secret, but at a professional development conference held on campus, where half the university's administrative staff had gathered to discuss outreach and diversity and budgets they didn't control. She was wearing a black blouse tucked into a gray skirt, heels too stiff for how long she'd been standing, and a name tag that looked out of place on her. He wasn't supposed to be there, but his professor had told him attending one panel would earn extra credit. He hadn't expected her to be speaking, hadn't known she would be introduced as the coordinator of a campaign he'd heard about but never associated with her name. She didn't see him at first. She looked composed, professional, distant. Her voice was steady, her posture strict. But her eyes kept scanning the room, and when they landed on him, they stayed there for a second too long. No one else seemed to notice, but he felt something drop in his chest. That was the first time he realized how many different lives she lived just to survive one. He didn't approach her during the break. He didn't linger near the refreshments or hover at the edge of her circle. He waited. He stayed outside, leaning against a stone column, watching the glass doors as faculty and staff moved in and out, laughing at things they didn't find funny. She came out with a group of colleagues, speaking to a man twice her age who seemed overly eager. When she caught sight of Noah, her voice faltered just slightly, but she didn't stop walking. She passed him like he was no one, like he was another bored student skipping class. Only when she was 5 steps past him did she say, without turning, "Take the stairs to the lower lot. I'll meet you by the loading dock." They didn't speak until they were alone, the concrete walls shielding them from view. She didn't apologize for the silence. She didn't offer reasons or excuses. She simply said, "They think something's going on. My direct supervisor asked if I'd had any student conflicts I hadn't reported." He asked what she said. She told him she denied everything. "I said I work through lunch, leave early, and barely remember student names unless I have to." Noah nodded slowly, then asked if she meant it. She didn't answer. He stepped closer, not to pressure, just to be near her. "You don't have to protect me from this," he said. "You're not the only one who could lose something." She looked at him with a kind of tired affection, the kind of look you give someone who still thinks fairness exists. "Yes, you are," she said. "You're 22. They'll write this off as confusion or misjudgment. They'll move you to a different department or recommend counseling. You'll graduate and start over. But me? They'll take my years and rewrite them as a pattern. One mistake and it becomes the whole story." Noah clenched his fists. "We didn't do anything wrong." She smiled faintly. "That doesn't matter." They stayed in that hidden corner for almost an hour. At one point, she rested her head against the wall and said, "I used to think if I played everything correctly, I'd be untouchable. Work hard, stay out of trouble, avoid scandal, don't get too close to anyone. But the second you step outside of what they expect from you, the whole system turns." Noah asked what she wanted to do now. She looked down at her shoes, then up at him. I want to keep seeing you. But we can't stay in this in-between space forever. Someone's going to force the issue, and when they do, we either tell the truth or we stop. The silence that followed wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. He knew what he wanted. But what he wanted came with consequences she'd have to carry more than he ever would. The issue was forced 3 days later at a formal campus fundraising gala, one Elise had helped organize, one attended by donors, trustees, and the kind of people who only wear black. Noah wasn't invited. He was working at the event as a student usher, helping guests to their tables, answering questions, and wearing a name tag that made him look like part of the scenery. He didn't see her until the second course. She was seated at a round table near the front, surrounded by board members. She wore a dark blue dress, simple, precise, nothing revealing, but nothing forgettable. She didn't see him at first. She was too busy listening, nodding, pretending. Then someone at her table said his name. Loud enough for him to hear. The voice belonged to a man in his 60s, tall, pale, holding a glass of wine like it was a performance. He leaned in toward her and said, "Isn't that the student I saw you with outside the Mercer building last week?" Her face stayed still, but her hands tensed. Another woman at the table turned to look at Noah. "He's the one you brought that book for, right?" Elise didn't answer. The man continued. "There's been talk, you know. About boundaries. About certain kinds of attention." He was smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. Noah froze. Not because he was afraid, but because Elise didn't look away this time. She looked right at him. And then she stood. Without waiting for permission, without pretending anymore, she walked across the room. Her heels echoed on the marble floor. Conversations dipped and rose around her. When she reached him, she said nothing. She simply took his hand. Quietly. Deliberately. Someone gasped. Cameras lifted. Voices murmured. A server dropped a fork. Elise turned toward the room. Her voice was calm. "If anyone wants to ask a question, I'd prefer they ask me directly." And just like that, the story no longer belonged to whispers. The next day, she was removed from 2 committees without explanation. Her supervisor sent her a message requesting a confidential conversation regarding recent public conduct, and by the following week, her inbox had been quietly reassigned to an assistant. Nobody said the word investigation, but every step taken pointed to one. Noah heard about it through a student worker in the admin office who mentioned something vague about a code of conduct review. No one mentioned his name. No one needed to. It had already been folded into the version of events people liked best, the one where an older woman crossed a line, and a younger man stood by, silent and impressionable, until everything unraveled. Elise didn't reach out for 4 days. When she finally called, her voice sounded clean, scrubbed of anger or panic. She told him she wasn't suspended, not officially, but they'd removed most of her responsibilities and told her to rest and reflect before the annual performance review. He asked what she wanted to do. She told him she hadn't decided. He asked if he should speak up. She said, "That depends. Are you ready to lose everything that makes your life simple?" He told her he didn't care about simple. She said, "You will when it's gone." They met at a motel 30 minutes out of town, far enough to avoid anyone they might know, close enough to feel like a break, not an escape. The room smelled like bleach and had 2 twin beds pushed together. She didn't unpack. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands in her lap, shoulders stiff. He asked what she was thinking. She said that I'd been careful my entire life, and none of it mattered once someone decided I didn't look careful enough. Noah sat down beside her, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "We could end it," he said. "Right now. Walk away. Let them believe whatever they want." She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "Would that make it easier?" "No." "Then what's the point? I don't want you to lose your life for being honest. I already lost most of it to being careful." She stood and walked to the window. Outside, a gas station hummed in the dark, the sign flickering. She crossed her arms, leaned her forehead against the glass. There's a part of me that wants to lie. Pretend it didn't happen. Say you misunderstood. Blame a gap in judgment or a stress reaction. They'd probably let me come back. But that version of the story makes me smaller than I am, and I've already spent too much time shrinking. Noah walked over and stood behind her. Then don't lie. She turned around slowly. If I tell the truth, you'll be pulled in, officially. They'll question everything you've ever said. They'll use me to discredit you and use you to define me. Let them try. You're too young to carry someone else's fallout. Maybe. But I'm already in it. The next morning, she submitted a statement to HR. 2 pages, concise, direct, nothing excessive. She admitted to the relationship. She named no dates, no specifics, only that it had been personal, private, and consensual. She refused to frame it as a lapse. When Noah was called in 3 days later, he sat in a gray room across from 2 administrative liaisons who didn't smile once. They asked if he'd ever felt pressured. He said no. They asked if Elise had ever offered academic favors. He said no. They asked if he'd been manipulated. He looked them both in the eye and said, I was seen. That's all. They wrote something down after that, then told him he could go. After his meeting, everything moved fast. Elise was offered a quiet resignation with severance in exchange for withdrawing her statement. She refused. The story leaked a week later. A local blog ran it first, followed by a larger outlet that published an article under the headline University Official at Center of Student Relationship Controversy. Her name wasn't in the title, but it was in the second sentence. Noah's wasn't mentioned, though he appeared in the comments anyway, accused, pitted, erased, exaggerated. His photo from a student club event was reposted and mocked. People debated her intentions like they were experts. Friends stopped texting. 2 of his professors began avoiding eye contact. He received an anonymous email saying, "You were groomed. It's not too late to speak up." He didn't reply. Elisa's resignation went through on a Tuesday. She cleared out her office in the evening, after hours, with no escort. Noah waited for her outside the building. She came out carrying 2 boxes and a canvas tote bag. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. He took one of the boxes, loaded it into the car, and sat with her in silence. After a few minutes, she said, I thought I'd feel relief. Do you? No. Just empty. He asked what she wanted to do now. She said, disappear. Then maybe start over, if I still can. They drove in silence for a while, toward nothing in particular. At a red light, she said, I wish we'd met at a different point in our lives. He looked at her and said, if we had, I might not have seen you. She didn't respond. She just looked out the window again. They spent the night at her apartment. She didn't sleep. He woke up around 4 and found her in the kitchen, barefoot, staring at the stove like she was waiting for something to begin or end. She turned when she heard him and asked, Do you think this was a mistake? He said, It doesn't feel like one. That's not the same. I know. He walked toward her. She didn't move away. They stood there for a long time, holding each other like people trying to remember what steady feels like. No promises. No future plans. Just a long, hard pause before whatever came next. When he left that morning, she didn't walk him to the door. She stayed seated on the edge of her couch, knees together, fingers interlaced. He asked if she wanted him to come back. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, I want you to go live your life and not have it shaped by mine. He stood there, not ready to agree, not ready to disagree. She added, but I hope, if I ever show up again, it's somewhere you don't have to hide me. He nodded once, turned, and left. The next day, she was gone. No forwarding address. No final message. All that was left was the space they had made together, and the question he kept hearing in his head, over and over, louder the longer it went unanswered: would you do it all again, knowing how it would end?